Welcome to Divcasts from the University of Chicago Divinity School. For more of our podcasts and information about our terms of use, please see our website, divinity.uchicago.edu/podcasts.
Okay, I think we should go ahead and get started. There may still be some people who come in. I thought it would be nice for Professor Tweed, before we get started, if you could just introduce yourselves, say what program you're in here, whether you're a master's student or a doctoral student, and just, a kind of general overview of what you're interested in. So why don't we start over here?
Sure. My name is Jacob Betts. I'm in the doctoral program in the history department, and I study Catholics late 19th, early 20th century.
My name is Kit Shields. I'm the coordinator of the Religions in America workshop and a second-year PhD student in Religions in America.
I'm Allison Davis. I'm a PhD student in religion and literature here, but I also study the history of religion in America.
I'm Bethany Lowry. I'm a doctoral student in Religions in America, and I work on religion and politics around women's rights issues in the United States.
I'm Kyle Wagner. I'm a PhD student in history of Christianity. That's with my advisor, and I'm writing a dissertation on Pentecostal anti-communism from World War II, etc.
Where? Pardon? Where are the Pentecostals?
In the United States. That would make more sense.
There are other places too.
It sounded a little bit like Where's Waldo?
I'm Matthew Beverpool. I'm a doctoral student in history of Christianity. I mostly study biblical commentaries and Latin Middle Ages.
My name is Garrett Campbell. I'm a PhD student in history of Christianity. I focus on the Reformation and Spain and magic and some heterodoxy stuff.
My name is Paul Jane. I'm in history of Christianity. Catherine is also my advisor. I'm writing my dissertation on two Chinese ministers, primarily in the movement that they founded in the 19th and 20th century. So Christianity in China and the world.
My name is Catherine Rochon. I'm a PhD student in religion and literature here, and I'm interested in representations of animals and race and religion in African American and Jewish American novels.
Clark Gilpin. I'm interested in
How long do you have?
But I guess I would say primarily the relationship between Christianity and modern genres of literature.
Could we go behind you? Who just came in? We're just doing quick introductions.
Yeah, I'm Daryl Ferguson. I'm doing a PhD in ethics, so the focus on Parker's ethical thought.
My name is Maida Sufti. I'm a first-year PhD in history of religions, and I work on modern contemporary Japanese Buddhism and also translation of Buddhism.
I'm interested in snacks. My name is Andrew Kunze. I study Hinduism in America, mostly contemporary stuff, but also some historical. I'm in anthropology of religion as a master's student, and I'm interested in the role of media in the social adaptation of American religions.
My name is Aisha Dawar. I'm a PhD candidate in anthropology of religion, and I look at two Islamic councils, one established end of the 19th century and one in the Berber one, and I study the ways that they often or approved or disapproved or rejected religious publications.
Josh Schwartz. I'm actually a PhD student at NYU, but I'll be teaching a class at Chicago Theological Seminary in the spring next year, and I found out about this workshop, so I thought it would be nice for me to attend. I'm studying Jewish mysticism, focusing in modern, late 18th to mid-19th century in Eastern Europe, looking at questions of emotional experience as mystical experience.
My daughter graduates from NYU in a week or two.
James Breen, first-year MA student in Religions in America, focusing on a lot of things in a lot of different classes, but interested in anti-Catholic movements in America.
My name is Nicholas Will. I'm a first year in Religions in America as well. I'm interested in, it changes every week, but right now I'm interested in ethnography and contemporary Christianity.
And
is Tom Whitaker. I'm a second year MA. I'm interested in evangelicalism in the Atlantic world.
In what was that?
The Atlantic world.
I'm Curtis Evans. I teach in the Religions in America program. My broader interests are religion and race in America post-Civil War, and I'm working on a project now looking at the Federal Council of Churches and its Department of Race Relations from the 1950s. I've been told by at least one person whose opinion I respect that it's an interesting project. It's an institution that very few people have heard of.
There's stories behind that. We might get to later.
My name is Ryan Taylor, first year PhD in religion in America, and work on early America, sort of religious and cultural history, 18th and 19th centuries, study the history of Mormonism, and also I'm really interested right now in the ritual, anti-ritualism, category of ritual, cultural conceptions.
I'm Catherine Breckus. One of the greatest compliments that a certain member of our faculty will make is that one's work is interesting. So that's a good endorsement. So it's my pleasure today to introduce Thomas Tweed, who holds the Harold and Martha Welch Endowed Chair in American Studies at the University of Notre Dame with a concurrent appointment in history. He's also faculty fellow in the Institute of Latino Studies and the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. He's the author of many books, and I know Tom's work very well, but I actually had to look them up because I was afraid I would miss one. There are so many. The American Encounter with Buddhism, 1844 to 1912, Victorian Culture and the Limits of Dissent. Our Lady of the Exile, Diasporic Religion at a Cuban Catholic Shrine in Miami, which won the American Academy of Religion's Book Award. Crossing and Dwelling, A Theory of Religion. And most recently, America's Church, the National Shrine and Catholic Presence in the nation's capital, 1917 to 1997, which won another book prize from the American Academy of Religion. He's also the editor of Reformed U.S. Religious History and co-editor of Asian Religions in America, a documentary history. He has served as the president of the American Society for the Study of Religion, and this year he was elected president of the American Academy of Religion. I think maybe what's most important for our conversation today is that Professor Tweed spent many years teaching at the University of North Carolina, where he won a Distinguished Teaching Award. I should also say that very long ago, he taught me when I was still in high school, and I liked the course so much. It was a required course in world religions. It was my first any kind of exposure to something beyond Christianity and Judaism. I liked the course so much that when some of my senior classmates started complaining that it was a requirement, I wrote an editorial in the student newspaper talking about why it was a great course. I never thought I'd see him again. And here he is. So let's welcome Tom Tweed.
We're going to tell that story publicly.
There are other stories
we
too.
do have photos that would be really embarrassing if anybody wants to see me later. We only discovered this. We were at Yale. I was given this talk at Yale or something, and there was people sitting around a table, and people were asking me what I had done, and I said I taught at some school. And Kathy started to put these pieces together and looked down and said, "Where?" And I said, "In Florida somewhere." And she said, "Where?" And there we go. We figured this out, and we reunited, and it's been close conversation partners ever since. It's a great honor to be here with you, and with all of you. It's great to be back at the University of Chicago, and it's great to be talking about teaching, which I care so deeply about. I was also Associate Dean for Undergraduate Curricula at North Carolina for 5 years, started the first year seminar program, and was in charge of the revision of the general education curriculum there. So I have thought a lot about teaching and curriculum things, so it's especially fun to talk with you about this. I thought what I would just do is not much preliminary things, and we'll get to conversations, and we'll just let this go wherever it goes. I don't know where it will go. But some background. I've taught at private institutions and publics, So I've taught undergraduates at Stanford and Miami, Duke, because I jointly taught some undergraduate courses, and now, of course, the University of Notre Dame, and at Publix, including Texas, and where I was for 15 years, University of North Carolina. So I say that because I think institutional context matters a lot, and I've had to sort of adjust to different settings. And I've taught a range of different kinds of courses and thought about what to share with you. I've taught the survey in American Religious History for many, many years, in many, many contexts. It's probably what I've taught the most. And I thought for some of you that would be the easiest and obvious thing to talk about, but it would be a little bit less of a stretch. And I thought I would share a different kind of syllabus, a quirkier one, that has that might be a source for conversation. I've taught Roman Catholicism in America, a course on U.S. Buddhism and global history that I jointly did with my colleague Richard Jackson at Duke. I've taught Asian religions in America, a course called Religion in LBJ's America, which is about religion and politics in the 20th century. An introduction to the study of religion once was some version of this was taught that way. The Religion in America course was once 360 undergraduates at North Carolina. I can believe that. I think it was as many people that could fit in that room. It was 400 or 360. And I taught the introduction to the study of religion with some version of this, something like this, to many hundreds of people, and the last time I think it was 120. I was going to say only, but that's a lot. And I've taught method and theory to the study of religion classes to majors in the study of religion and many other things, and of course many graduate student courses over the years. But so I've been in different institutions and taught a range, but for some quirky reasons I thought this might be the most illuminating to focus on, because it had a particular institution with particular kinds of curricular requirements that might be interesting as we try to think together about course design and syllabus construction. I thought I would just say a few things about what's in my mind as I'm making up a course and a syllabus. And I came up with 6 things. I usually come up with 10 things or 3 things, which has something to do with my religious background or something else. I assume it's not just because it's always that way, but I allowed it to stay at 6. It was difficult for me because I want to order stuff, but you have 6. So here's some things that I do and that might help you think this through. Questions I ask myself. How do I best adapt the course to this particular institutional context? That's the thing we start with. Teaching at Notre Dame to a class of 14 in a seminar is not the same as teaching 400 to North Carolina undergraduates with a completely different situation. Second, how do I best meet the college or university or seminary or Divinity School, whatever, curricular requirements? It counts for something, and you inherit particular things. Sometimes upper level electives don't count for anything, but sometimes I decided to pick something that counts for lots of things, and I've taught this as a social science requirement. It has counted as a global perspective course. It has counted as, I taught it as a writing requirement. It's counted at North Carolina and as writing, and at Notre Dame it counts as it's oral communication. So the real challenge was every course in this college seminar, which is capped at 14, must have 2/3 of its evaluation in oral communication, which is an extraordinary challenge. One of the things I thought I would just try to outline here is that who can do that? No one can, so let's just try to think it through together. Third thing I try to ask is, what do I want the students to learn? In other words, what are the learning outcomes? Meaning, when they're done, what should they be able to do? This is on the syllabus, in case you didn't notice that. And to what extent is it certain kinds of knowledge? To what extent is there certain kind of refining certain kinds of skills? And I even added to my Notre Dame syllabus, which I have never added before. Every syllabus is, I've never taught the same one twice. This one I added an inclusive classroom statement because I thought it was a good thing to do. Quirky kind of thing to do, but I wanted them, part of the outcome was I wanted them to embrace a multiplicity of voices in a way, and I think that usually happens, but I decided to put it on the syllabus. Fourth, with those learning outcomes in mind, how should I assist student learning, not assess it, first assist it. How do I help them reach these kind of learning outcomes? And there's a couple of weird things about this syllabus that I'll call your attention. You probably found your own set of weird things, but it seems to me a couple of quirky things, each of which developed from interactions with students and trying to answer specific questions of how do I help students learn. Stupid Question Minute, I have started every class, including graduate seminars. It's extremely good in graduate seminars where everybody's very, very smart and very special. And always a little bit nervous because they think everybody else in the room is a little bit more smart and more special. So I just institutionalized my concern to make sure that people could ask questions. So I begin every class with Stupid Question Minute as a way to playfully endorse all questions. There, of course, are no stupid questions. I tell them, and I've never heard one, and I have still not heard one. And you, if you're just completely lost, you might just read me a sentence and say, huh? What does that mean? Or go back in, what is Buddhism anyway? I mean, whatever. This works either extremely well or pretty well. It never doesn't work. It always works to some extent. And it was just something to come up for how to deal with, how to help them learn. Focus readings. I started my career assigning voluminous assignments, very difficult philosophical texts, and various kinds of things. And I came to realize that if I didn't, I still assign sometimes, not in this course. This course is very modest readings, I think, or I thought it was modest, on purpose, because it's a kind of required lower level course. But I always give focus readings, and on my other syllabi I do this too. Here's 10 pages that I expect all of us to have read extremely carefully. When you walk in, things you can eat with your cereal. Our understanding is we've all read this really carefully, and I could ask you about what you think about that focus reading, and you could tell me. It's just our contract, and I actually find the opposite of what my colleagues think we find. Tweed's easy about this kind of thing. The opposite happens. More students are more prepared, meaning sometimes with the 360. I actually tried cold calling in that class. Mr. Smith, Ms. Jones, and I had a seating chart in front of me. People just read more. Even on the tough days, everybody's read something. Combined with intellectual journals, in which you hand in, which means that in any particular classroom, maybe 2/3 of the people have written something for that day. It's extremely labor intensive for me, but extremely good for helping students learn. There are also study questions, meaning when you're dealing with large undergraduates from diverse fields, there's engineers and there are philosophers, they can't even imagine what would a person be assigning this for. So I tend to write study questions. If you're completely lost, I say, just look at that first before you start the reading. Of course, you can have your own questions, but if you're perplexed, you could look at the study questions there. And then I've instituted for the last 4 or 5 years learning groups with fixed members. I assign them based on a range of things. I look at majors, I look at hometowns, I look at years. I try to get, it can't be 5 women, it can't be 4 engineering majors and a history person, which means you have to work at it to some extent. And that's your group for the year. And that happens by the first class into the second. That's a new thing that has worked well. Student responses on quiz evaluations have said this has worked well. Fifth, with those learning outcomes in mind, how should I assess student learning? The first one was, how do I help student learn? Not the same thing as how to assess it. What do I do? And I already mentioned intellectual journals. Early on, teaching at a public university with Orthodox Jews, my first assignment at the University of Miami was an extraordinarily rich and diverse classroom. One of everything was in that room. It was a kind of Noah's Ark. It was spectacular. If we were talking about Divinity in Suriname, in indigenous tradition, there was, to my astonishment, yes, I'm a practitioner of that. There was just everything in this room. But some of them wanted to work out in a public university setting and in a private university, thinking through academic study of religion, how Jesus loves me, this I know, but I'm encountering kind of a different criteria for what constitutes common sources of understanding here. And so what I decided to do was introduce intellectual journals, which I used at North Carolina effectively, I think, in which your assignment is to focus on, it does two things. It focuses on the text, so you're reading text carefully. You must begin with a quotation from the text and offer a sustained response to it. And it's either acceptable, unacceptable. The unacceptables, sometimes, in the beginning you get a couple of unacceptables and we get your attention. And but it's a way to sort of assess learning that rewards different kinds of things. It rewards diligence, it rewards close reading. So there are some brilliant students that just cannot get themselves to write this many journal entries. They just can't do it. It gives another way for people to succeed in the class. Something I tried a few years ago, I used to do only essays, but I decided that students should actually have to know stuff as well as refine skills. I was about skills, reading, writing, thinking, and so on. But I think what I decided was they just didn't know the particular stuff that I kind of knew. And you need to know that. So what I introduced was a kind of a weird hybrid, and I don't call them, there are no exams in my class anymore, there are just feedback pauses. I tell them, you want some, I usually do this in the beginning of class, you want some feedback, don't you? And of course undergraduates, well yeah. So we're going to pause to give you some feedback. Okay, good. We don't have exams in here. And so what you get, of course it's an exam. But it has a really boring kind of quantitative multiple guess thing, which asks kind of picky historical detail. And then it has a broad out-of-class essay, which you bring in. And then, of course, the learning groups is somewhat different, in which we actually, you grade each, in your learning group, you swap them, and you grade each other's quizzes. First you begin, and your learning group decides what the answers to those questions are. We don't tell you. And then you have this debate. Trust me, makes no sense. This goes extremely well. So learning groups of 5 say this and that, and they go through the thing, and sometimes I need a little bit more time. And you can challenge one. If you can make a persuasive argument for why it should be B instead of C, I will consider that. But it must be a good argument. And of course, I always read it with one that's almost impossible, that has multiple answers, and another one that has slightly something, in order to generate learning, because then they're teaching each other. They don't notice this, they're teaching each other. It works spectacularly well. I can't figure out, and then I give them, you're going to all laugh at me, happy faces, if you get all of them right. How this generated was somebody once said, well, what do I get? An undergraduate said. What do I get? I like the satisfaction of knowing you know stuff. But this was not, what should I get? Happy face. I thought, okay, we will. And I think they thought, but I actually buy happy faces. And you may pick the color and whether it's the shiny one or and then there's a ritual in which after we've done all this, I personally, in the big rooms this is difficult, I give you the happy face. This makes no sense, I don't understand it. People actually want to get a happy face. And if you haven't gotten one by the third one, people, undergraduates, study harder to get happy faces. It makes no sense. My last year in Austin, Austin, of course, has t-shirts that say, keep Austin weird. For a version of this course, I decided that I wanted to come up with some other kind of reinforcement. And so I made t-shirts that say, keep Austin liminal. If you don't know Victor Turner, this makes no sense to you, but they thought this was a big yuck. And so if you had to do a lot. You had to do a perfect score on the final feedback pause, or 3 really tough things. You will win this t-shirt. The point was, let's find multiple ways to have fun about this and assess and reinforce student learning. And of course, there's always an essay and always a culminating assignment, and there's rubrics for all things. If you don't know what a rubric is, there's a book called Introduction to Rubric. To Rubrics is a second edition out. I have discovered that this works better. It works really great with TAs. So when I had 5 or 6 TAs, when you try to get uniformity and all things, students know what you're expecting. So I have very specific rubric for oral communication component, what an essay, what the features are, and I find that this helps. Finally, with all those kinds of ways of trying to assess it, with the learning groups and outcomes in mind, I ask, how should I open and close the class? One of the fundamental mistakes that I made, and many of us make, is we just stop. We don't conclude. And we just start. We don't really open. So my premise is, you should do on the first day what you want students to do throughout the first semester, for the whole semester. If you're not doing it the first day, they're not going to do it. And you should conclude in a way that pulls the things together. So the assignment should be returning to their own writing and reflecting on the questions. So you announce questions at the beginning, and you tell them you're going to return to them, and at various places along the way, you pop up and say, well, what are the implications of that for this question, for that question? You know, you're going to have to answer. And the last class is us collectively deciding something or writing a definition of something. And there's this elaborate theatrical sort of thing where a TA or me or somebody puts something up on the screen and we come up with the class definition of this or proposal about that. And it's chaotic and it's loud and interesting. And then we post it to the webpage. So my sense is, and the last journal is always them answering the fundamental question. So one of the things I always ask is, if those are the learning goals, and this is the way to assess it, and this is the way to assist it, how do I actually begin this class, and how do I actually end it? You always begin with the question you're asking in the class. You always conclude answering it. And of course, they decide sometimes we can't answer that question, and of course that's painful too. Even if it's just complete frustration, they say things that you would say at the end, my work here is done. Well, there is no simple conclusion. This is just too complicated, we can't. And I just say, I don't say it to them, but I think, great. But it has to conclude in some kind of way. So anyway, that's a little bit about how I approach it. Should we at this point just open it up? Sure. Why don't we do that?
Yeah. Quick question. You said you get unacceptable sometimes to some students. I'm just curious what kind of things are unacceptable?
It doesn't open with a quote. It isn't a sustained reflection about that quote. In the process of reflecting on that sustained reflection, you can actually say something about yourself. But it has to be it isn't long enough. One of the difficulties if you look at the number of pages, this one's not so much because it's oral communication. In my courses, there's a lot of writing. And one of the practical questions is, how do you actually grade all that writing from so many students? Even if you have TAs, how do you do that? And there has to be some kind of compromise. And each year after journals, I always think, never again, I'm not doing it. And then the course evaluations always say, it helped me stay up, it was really helped me. And I try to say, start working at your essays in the journal responses. Try at interpretations of particular texts that might be. And so I go back to do it. So you get a minus, meaning that didn't count at all. Try next time. And you can't go back to it. You can't make up. If you missed them, you missed them. So there's a little bit of pressure like that. So what I find is after a minus in the beginning, almost everybody's in your office hours and wants to know what to do better. And you tell them, and then that goes away. And somebody will turn in only a couple and get a D. Even if you think that's astonishing, but somebody always just doesn't hand in some of them. Yeah, it's not because, it's really about the attention to detail and the engagement with the reading. If you're just off saying, I once saw sunny days, I mean, it has to focus on the text. If you don't do that, it's unacceptable.
I have a question about the study questions. You refer to them as, you design them in such a way that for students who are having difficulty sort of wrestling with the material or at least coming up with their own question, So I'm curious, is the object here to get them to think about these issues in respect to what you're going to ultimately assess them on, or is it primarily for the sake of facilitating the discussion on a given date? I'm asking it for a number of reasons. One is I've wrestled with the question, with the issue about preparing questions in advance, because, I don't know, I'm thinking that perhaps it pushes students in a certain way and perhaps closes down certain questions that they might come up with. So is that a concern that you might have? Or?
I don't do it for graduate courses. Okay. I don't do study questions for graduate courses. I do it for undergraduate courses. And the really good students ignore them. I mean, to be honest, they have their own questions, and they're either irked by me giving them questions, or they just don't care. They don't even notice they're there. Who cares? The pre-med student who has, this is their elective, they're a senior, they hate it. They think they hate it. They end up maybe hating it less. They don't even know what to say about this material. I understand about mitochondria. I know what to do with that. What do I do with this? Those are the students who are appreciative of it. Everybody else just ignores it. But it's a way of saying, if you can answer those questions, you've read pretty well. I find it doesn't shut down conversation, though. And again, I don't do it for graduate students.
Does it map onto what you do in class? And that's my sort of question with what Curtis was asking, is that I see this on the syllabus as sort of a way to think about the readings, but then is it something you start with or something that's sort of just background?
I use it for pauses, or if a class is meandering in some way, I can use it to pull it back. It's stupid question minute, and what did you write about your journal? Are the two things that always can anchor people. So stupid question minute gives us a chance to sort of focus on the particulars. They're almost never stupid questions. They're always really significant. And the wonderful thing I didn't see coming with that is that halfway through the class, somebody will say, well, I guess this is sort of a stupid question minute question, but so that students who feel a little bit, it's a kind of a cloak they can wear if you're a little bit more hesitant. I'm trying to reach students who are not so garrulous and who need some kind of structures. So they actually use it as a kind of tool for saying something, even though it's not a question. I go back to the study questions and what you wrote in your journals if we're wandering here, or if there's something else. But I tend to not do that. What I tend to do when it's 360 is I will give a kind of mini lecture, and then I will build in conversation in the middle of the class. So what I will say in the lecture outline, which I have posted, they will know that right here we're going to deal with a text in great depth. And so we will pause, even in 360, I have conversations. So what do you make of this? And then we do something back and forth. So those are crutches. Those are kind of breadcrumbs. Those are something to get us back. But if it goes another direction, great. As long as it's vital, everyone's participating, we're improving skills, and we're advancing on the big questions of the class. What's secular? What's religious? I'm happy.
I noticed that you use a lot of DVDs in your class. So I wondered if you could just talk about how you use those, what are those about. It seems like a lot of them are sort of to introduce a topic.
Well, a couple of them were just, I was vice president of the AAR, and I was representing the AAR at an international meeting. A couple of them were because I'm out of town. Just pragmatic things. And what do I do without TA? I showed DVD. But I actually did find that, at least for this generation of students, this is much more than I started recently. Early in my career, I didn't do this. I just find that undergraduates, and of course I don't do this at all with graduate students, I just thought they find it more vivid. If you're talking about Hajj and you show them that what everybody thinks, who knows such things, is a really good account of the journey to Mecca, and they see people throwing stones, and they see people shaving things and sacrificing things and walking here and walking there, they have a context and richness to it. So I tend to use that. I don't use the whole thing often. Like there's a documentary about Pedro Pan kids. I guess we say Peter Pan in English. I don't say that in English too much. Peter Pan. Operation Peter Pan, the Cuban exile kids who were sent to Miami by parents worried about them when Fidel Castro took control. And when I just said that kind of stuff, they didn't get it. They watched that, now they're tearing up, and I just noticed that the visual draws people in better. So I don't show all of it. I often do clips of it or pieces of it, and then have conversations in learning groups about what just happened, and bring you back to the whole group so that everybody talks in a particular class.
Could I just follow up on that? I noticed the DVDs, and it didn't occur to me that it's because you were traveling. I thought this was strategic. And I wanted to hear you reflect on it because one of the challenges that I faced in not only undergrad class but graduate courses is that students don't have a lot of religious literacy in traditions outside of their own. And so it can be very difficult when you've assigned a reading, say about Buddhism, and when you come in, you spend the first 40 minutes of class just trying to get people to understand something about the tradition. So I wondered whether this was just your way of trying to be very effective in communicating what a tradition is. And I wondered, if you particularly liked these DVDs, because if so, this looks like a solution to a sort of common problem that I have, especially if there was a way to make some of these available on a website so that people could watch them at home. Yeah. Because even, I've had students come in and say they don't know what the Protestant Reformation is.
Right.
And so it can take a long time to give people the background on that before you can even start talking about Pilgrim's Progress.
That's exactly what's behind it. And the DVD on Buddhism, the Middle Way of Compassion works in the classroom. The other one I showed this time because Notre Dame couldn't get it streamed to the website in time was disastrously bad. So part of what I was thinking
is that on here? Is there?
It's not on here.
Okay.
But it was a British series. The advantage is they're all about 23 minutes, something like that. And there's one on Islam, which is okay. There's one on Christianity. There's one on Buddhism, and so on. And they're short enough, and they give some background. In Texas, when I showed the Christianity one, some students in the back raised their hand. And she said, I thought we were going to talk about Christianity today, after we saw the film on Christianity. And there was a Pentecostal, self-described evangelical, a Roman Catholic, a Calvinist from a Presbyterian church. There was, you would say, a reasonable range. I thought we were going to see Christianity today. And I said, Thomas, I thought so too. Say a little bit more. Well, that's not what I understand. I call myself a Christian. And this was someone who had gone to a evangelical, I would say, an evangelical megachurch that looks like an auditorium. You know these places. That had no markers of Christianity, would say it was non-denominational, trans-denominational. It was what Jesus taught, and did not recognize herself in any of that. I didn't know what to say about that. It was a useful teaching moment because they were really upset that I had not yet got to talk about Christianity yet. And I, of course, being me, you don't know me, I took this as a great teaching opportunity. So the next class, I began with a big conversation about what is Christianity anyway, and then gave multiple things. But I found that unless you're going to lecture for 50 minutes about things, and then show lots of images, which I've tried this way. I mean, I've tried where you do that. What I actually do now is show a short film or clips of a film about a tradition, that specialists in that tradition think is pretty good. And then I give a kind of an orienting kind of talk. It's a brief, like a 20 minutes, where I give some kind of basic details and a lecture up there. The Reformation, 4 traditions in the Reformation or something, and a couple of details. I read some quotes. I read Martin Luther when we come, and so I do some of that, and he was mentioned in the film. But that is sort of why I do it, to introduce a tradition. So what I do in these kinds of classes, and in the Introduction to Study of Religion class, which I taught for many years in North Carolina and Texas, the first day is always, and I try to do them all the same, which is why I wanted to use the same series. Because I wanted to give some sense in a public university that we were treating traditions fairly. Some traditions need lectures and others don't. Some need films, and that they all get lectures, or nobody gets lectures. In a public university, I decided. So the first day is always introduce the tradition with some visual images, give some kind of introduction to it, and then we begin the other sort of sources. So that's the pattern I try to do, and I'm always looking for something that works better. I think the Christianity one works, the Islam one works. The other Buddhism in that series dramatically does not work, and this one sort of works because you get to see multiple kinds of Buddhisms in different places. Yeah.
The question about religious literacy seems to open up the question about what's particular about designing a religious studies syllabus or religious studies curriculum versus a curriculum for any other kind of humanities class.
It depends on what your institutional content is. I mean, so what are you trying to do? At the University of Texas, in a really tense political situation, where where any kind of academic study of religion in any way, where you would try to fairly treat multiple traditions, was challenged. What we did in a version of a syllabus like this, we would actually have, in the second class, we would actually talk about why study religion in a public university. And we would read Warren Nord, himself, my former colleague at North Carolina, or we would read something, a kind of evangelical, and somebody else about why would we do this in a public university and how could we do it? And we would generate what does it mean to study religious studies and what are we not doing here? At Notre Dame, what I found this year was another kind of issue that never came up before. In about the second or third class, a bright student, theology and something else major, said in the syllabus you have, what are we doing? That was a question, very stupid question. What are we doing here? Say a little bit more. Well, like, what are we doing? I mean, she really couldn't say it. What she meant to say, what my answer now this year is, because I didn't, I meant what I should say is, we're engaged in the comparative and cross-disciplinary study of religion. What I said is, we're engaged in the kind of study of religion. This is not theology. This is not anything else. She had gone to Catholic schools all of her life. And that means, what is theology? They asked me. Yikes. I gave an answer, which I will risk with you because I love you. This is being recorded. I probably shouldn't. Somebody in this situation might give a definition. What I actually said was, you're working as a theologian if you're writing from and for communities of faith. We're not doing that here. Though, of course, we could talk about such matters. I then decided I would correct my authority. So I went to the chair of the theology department at Notre Dame and said, I just told because I knew he would hate this. Well, I wasn't sure he'd hate it, I thought he would. But I thought this would help decenter my authority. So I just told them this, and his response was, Gustavo, meaning my colleague Gustavo Gutierrez, Gustavo would like that. That was the end of the answer. So I take that to mean, so you personally, well, no, I mean, anyway. So I went back and said to them, what the exchange? And I take that to mean that he might think that theology is something else. But whatever theology is, we're not doing it here. It doesn't mean we're not engaged in normative activity. It doesn't mean that values are not being enacted here. It just means that that's not what this is. So religious studies, so the study of religion, is engaging in a comparative cross-disciplinary study. This course I was teaching is the college-wide arts and letters interdisciplinary seminar. They all must be cross-disciplinary. They all must emphasize oral communication. And there isn't a religious studies department there. Though there are a number of us, Christian Smith in sociology, Scott Appleby in history, lots of us who do religion in lots of places, and there's an emerging kind of cross-disciplinary thing. So I think I just sort of came up with some kind of definition in that very different context, apparently badly. It's a lovely question, isn't it? What are we doing here? It's great. I'm going to, of course, what I'm going to do is this time I'm going to say that question. I'm going to tell that story. You might find yourself wondering what we're doing here, because the case study I pick is this shrine in Mexico, which when I'm teaching that in Texas or in North Carolina, and I'm teaching it in North Carolina to mostly white and black Protestants, diversity then meant some Muslims, some Jews, but diversity was black and white, black Baptists, black Methodists, varieties of white Protestants, a couple of Catholics. So for them, this is as exotic as Chicago. Chimayo is just this crazy place. They're eating dirt, and oh my God, it's that crazy Catholic stuff. So it was exotic enough, and they weren't nervous. These Catholic students, 9 out of 10 were Catholic, for them it was close enough to what they knew that they were uncomfortable because we were using tools of analysis that didn't say it was a good thing or a bad thing, it just analyzed it. And so they were disquieted. And so I'm going to begin the disquieting at the start next time and say, this is what we're doing. If you don't want to be doing that, you should do something else. Close enough?
You've sort of begun to address this question anyway, but you mentioned that you included the inclusive classroom bit on this particular syllabus.
Yeah.
And it seems like, as you've kind of pointed out, that there's some necessity in that for this kind of course. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you create an environment where someone feels comfortable saying, I'm Christian, that's not but still understands sort of, as you're saying, what you're doing there.
Yeah. You can say you're Christian in my classroom, but you have to be able to represent fairly what a Muslim says. So you can say, Jesus loves me, this I know. You just have to be able to say something else. Muhammad, peace be upon him, is sealed crossless. You have to be able to do both things. So one of the weird things I do that I didn't want to admit here, because it's too weird, is that I engage in channeling, as the students call it. So what I do in a kind of theatrical way, in Miami, everybody was in the room, and I would just say, the Thai Buddhists tell us about Buddhism in Thailand, or whatever. In classrooms that are less heterogeneous too, what I basically say is that, as I say in the end of the Crossing the Dwelling, that I think it's about teaching and learning is about making the familiar strange and the strange familiar, and what you need most is empathy and the capacity to understand and affect and cognition of other symbolic worlds. So what I'm going to do is, my job is to help you understand that. So in a stupid question minute question, sometimes I will actually kind of theatrically give an answer. I never make up an answer. It sounds like I'm making up an answer, but I'm saying things that people of those faith traditions have said to me, or that I've read. So I'm never sort of just imagining what it's like to be somebody else. But I will often do this, and sometimes I occasionally do it well, and everybody's a little bit, whoa. Like I get really annoyed. That's exactly what everybody says about us. And I just can't. Have you been to an airport recently? Of course, you don't even remember if you've been to an airport because you're not me, whatever the answer is. And everybody sits back and thinks, whoa, huh. So part of what I try to do is make it a space where everybody, you can be you just have to make sure that you're listening to everybody else in the room and everybody who's not in the room. So I kind of demand a kind of faithful, respectful empathy. And I try to model it in a kind of stupid way that makes me seem weird. I mean, I'm kind of the brunt of the joke a little bit, or I'm a little bit odd. But it serves a purpose because they then get to hear another way of saying things. And sometimes somebody else in that classroom. I remember in Texas, we're teaching about the Alamo. Now, I don't know if you know much about the Alamo. But in Texas, white evangelical Protestants from Dallas have an Alamo. Border town Latinos have another Alamo. And the white kids from Dallas don't know about the other. They literally don't know about the other Alamo. They think it's a great place of heritage for our past and so on. So I will sometimes start the conference, we're teaching about the Alamo, and I will say something. I will also, please forgive me, I will say. And I tell everybody in the beginning, I'm going to offend each of you at least once in the class. Please forgive me in advance. And then I will say, theatrically, you know, it's a place of horror and violence. Where you killed my ancestors, I'm not too happy about it. What are you talking about? Remember, I don't want to remember the Alamo. It's terrible. It has nothing to do with all. I got to say something. And then, is there anybody else here from a border town? This is what actually happened in Texas. Tell us a little bit about that. And then you get 3 or 4 testimonials, and all the white evangelicals from Dallas sort of sit back in their chair and go, whoa. But you have to be really nice to evangelicals. At the end of that class, I also said, in the private public school setting, I didn't know how to handle my own position. So students often wanted to say, this is one of the things you have to think through. Whatever the institutional context is, who are you? And what are you going to say about your own faith, non-faith position? It doesn't matter to me what you said. You just have to have thought that out. For years, at public universities, my saying was, I'm a person of faith, but I think it's going to get in the way, and I'm not going to talk to you about this. At the end of the class, when grades are turned in, I'd be happy to take you to lunch and answer any questions you have. At the end of that class, with 120 students, the one in which I said that Alamo thing, 17 students handed in a final and said, we're ready for lunch now. I thought, oh, okay. And about 15 of them were evangelicals that were convinced I was evangelical. A white evangelical from Dallas, because I had represented that so faithfully, with such passion. I even wanted my daughter to marry an evangelical quarterback who was popular at the time. They were convinced. Because in one of my theatrical moments, I said, if only. You know, I don't know what I said. And I said something, my reading of Left Behind was so persuasive or so kind of empathic that they thought, they were convinced, and they were quite hurt that I wasn't. That is a kind of success. And I have had students that guess the whole semester about what you are. I find it a little bit annoying. It doesn't matter what I am. In Notre Dame, I now take I'm working on a different way. My new thing is to say, I'm happy to answer any questions you have in office hours. I'm a person of faith, and I'm happy to answer any question you have there. And then they actually, that young woman who said, what are we doing, came to my office hours and said, are you Catholic? She wanted to know. And that was an important question for her. Where in a public setting, I never answered it until the grades were in. Now, of course, some students in North Carolina took 4 classes from me. So they had the lunch, asked me a million questions, and then took another class. But they swore kind of oath among each other. They actually never told anybody. I didn't ask them not to do it, but they didn't tell people. So the way to get inclusiveness, I think, is to model respect and empathy and just not tolerate anything else. You just don't allow anybody to talk that way. And if you're going to talk about your faith community or your personal stand, you can do that, but you also need to be able to represent other ways of being in the world. And if you can't do that, the kind of the culture of the classroom is going to make you feel uncomfortable. Because I'm going to, can anybody channel for me this author? How would she answer that question? So I try to, and actually what I started this time, for the first time in this syllabus, is to actually teach active listening and talk about empathy. What's wrong with the world is we don't have empathy. You can't hear each other. You can't understand cognition or affect from other people. So we're going to teach you what reflective active listening is. I never did that before. So we actually had a session about how to listen. And they tried it out in small groups, and they saw some things about it, and they did exercises, and they went out and did other things. So the premise is inclusiveness means speaking in certain ways and listening in certain ways, and it means forcing yourself to go beyond the familiar. I find that as long as you actually you do offend everybody, and you do channel effectively multiple viewpoints, by the end everybody says, okay, fine, I wouldn't do it that way, but sure, I'm in. Okay.
How did you deal with the 2/3 of your final grade being oral communication? I mean, I don't have a lot of experience in higher ed.
Yeah.
Is this something that's distinctive at Notre Dame? And if it is, how did you adapt your teaching style, your grading style with that?
No, it's a great question, because I'm assuming here everybody wants to teach someday or hopes to in some different setting, and you never know where you're going to end up. Humanities, Stanford has a humanities program where they hire lecturers for 3-year contracts where you teach the big general education curriculum. There are places where they want writing people. At Duke, some of my students from Duke went on to teach in the writing program at Duke and did. So yeah, you have to think about what the particulars of the requirement were. I didn't know what to do at first. I'm against it. I think they're wrong. If I'm there one more year or something, I'm going to start saying 2/3 is too much. So if you look at it, I don't really do exactly 2/3. I come close. What I decided to do was do a couple of things. Keep a focus on writing and reading, and just make all the writing assignments worthless. So you have a lot of low-risk writing assignments. And then you talk to your fellow students about all your writing in small groups, in the whole class, in front of everybody. So what I just added was more oral communication to the writing. I didn't really take away that much writing. If you count up and look at some of the writing, they're not writing really long things, but they're discussing them with their classmates. What I think the new thing I'm going to do, I'm not sure, this is either hokey or good, is that, TED Talks? Anybody familiar with TED Talks? One of the most beloved presidents of Notre Dame is Father Ted Hesburgh. So I think I'm going to have them do Father Ted Talks with the Ted in parentheses, Father in parentheses, and have them do some kind of mirror something new. I always try something new. This is either a good idea or really not. I don't know. But it's another way of experimenting with the oral communication part.
In terms of assigning kind of lower risk writing assignments, did you find that you were getting a lot more writing assignments turned in that were not as high quality work as you would like to see because they weren't as large of a portion of the grade, or did you find that people were more willing to take risks and kind of engage questions they wouldn't have otherwise engaged in because they didn't have to worry about the grade?
That's a really good question. I did not find that they were about as good as they were with undergraduates at Duke and North Carolina and Texas. Now, it could be that Notre Dame students are just more studious or something. They are kind of really diligent. I mean, they're really good students. I mean, meaning if you should do something, they do it. But I didn't find that the quality went down, partly because they knew other people were talking about it. And I think some of it might be that the rubric was difficult but clear. Like, for example, part of what they have to do in that essay to get it perfect is you have to anticipate objections. Some of the things I'm asking them to do are actually quite difficult for sophomores, for first semester sophomores to do. You don't just write a thesis and support it with evidence, but to get full credit, you also have to identify and anticipate objections and respond to objections in a very short essay. It's really tough. And they want to get a good grade for some reason, even if it counts for less. And they want the happy face, but they still want to get it right. Now, they worked hard on the big oral presentation at the end. I will say that. They were pretty polished and good. But they didn't slack off on the writing. And some people with the journals, which count for one check. Some people, in every class, somebody writes 2.5, 3-page journal entries every single time. They don't have to write that much. Some people take it really, really seriously. In fact, what I do is actually leave a little room at the very end. You can only get a 98. I don't know what to say with somebody who does, some people in this class handed in 3 or 4 more journals than they could possibly get credit for. They were already beyond the limit. So my only response is, my daughter, who's an undergraduate at NYU, is outraged by this as a person who gets good grades. That, well, I thought I was going to get 100, now you get a 98, so I could give you 100 if you turn in more. But some people in that assignment will do more assignments than they have to by multiple. I would say a quarter of the class, maybe more, will turn in many more than they have to do. Which I don't know what to say, except for great. But you would think they would slack off. Or I would think they would slack off. Yeah.
With things like, expecting them to anticipate arguments and be able to communicate clearly in writing, do you find time to teach them how to do that, or do they need to come to you in office hours or learn that elsewhere in the school?
No, I actually take class time. Mm-hmm. And they kind of workshop them in learning groups. One of the ways I use learning groups is that in the time before they submit their essay, they bring in drafts. And I say, it's just safe and relax. It's just you. I'm not going to look at it. It's just you. And of course, somebody doesn't bring it at all, but he has peer pressure. And they actually exchange them out of class. They exchange them in class. I'm not sure how to refine this argument. What do you think would be the most serious objection? So they actually produce some of that. So maybe one of the reasons they're better is that by the time they get to me, and obviously some people come to class, the engineers are just, or the pre-med biology majors sometimes are like, what? And they do come to office hours, but I take time out of the class to explain each of those components. I will always give a kind of stylistic, I never do more than 2 after an essay back, because people can't hear more than 2. I say something like parallel constructions or the passive voice. And I will give them things to read, like a chapter from a book that I like very much called Revising Prose. I will just talk, I'll pick a couple of things, and before that, I will talk a little about what's a thesis and what's not a thesis. And what kind of objections could you anticipate for that kind of argument? And so we will try to model that. And to some extent, what I'm asking is pretty high level. It's short, but it's pretty demanding stuff. And they don't notice that it's demanding, or they don't know that or something, I guess, because it seems so clear. But very few people can anticipate objections the first essay they give at the level that I'm requiring it, I think. Yeah.
So the overarching theme being pilgrimage, there's also this sort of underlying intersecting question about the religious and the secular.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you sort of talk a little bit more about how that plays out over the course of the
class. First of all, the theme, at points I have considered gender. the point is, and actually Jonathan Smith wrote a great essay in a book about teaching the introductory course that I agree with. His point and my point is less is more. So I never deal with more than 3 traditions. I focus on a particular theme. I taught a course on religion of the body. I think you could pick other ones. Why I keep going back to pilgrimage is you can get all kinds of things in. You get ritual, you get material culture, and then you just read women's pilgrimage. There's one that the students always like about a Muslim woman account of journey to Mecca, and she's complaining about gender imbalances, and the students all say, it works well. So I use that, but I'm not committed to that particular theme. I'm just committed to one that would get the widest range of things I want to talk about. In terms of the issue about the secular and the religious, what I'm really aiming for is, again, a really sophisticated, difficult thing at the entry level, which is I want them to think through what does the category of religion mean. And of course, when I didn't teach at Notre Dame, I didn't open in the Notre Dame football stadium. That's an example of teaching context. So when I was with Carolina, I talked about basketball. And when I made Duke, when I talked about evil and the problems of theodicy, for example, students going to Duke. Big yucks. At Texas, it was Oklahoma. So my sense is, so if I were you, when I land someplace, I would think, where am I? And what's important here? So I decided I would use, which of course I didn't do before, we never read Nuke Rockwood before, I decided I would use what was at hand to raise big questions. The basic goal is to do something like this, is to get really sophisticated conversation among relatively new students, almost none of whom are really skilled in the study of religion, by, I was going to say tricking them, but not so much, but by slowly, it's designed to do this. It's designed to build tension. I tell them this, I warn them. It's designed to increasingly build tension over the course of the semester. And it's self-consciously. So what we begin with is, I give them a definition of religion. I give them 25 definitions of religion. Sheets with definitions of religion. They're kind of kids, whatever. I tell them besides criticism of Garrett's, I tell them whatever. And they don't even know what to say. Then I give them a couple of methods about things and give them one case study and ask them all to sort of analyze that. The premise is that you have some methodological tools, and nobody would say Chimayo in New Mexico is not religious. Then we do 3 classic pilgrimage things. Nobody, again, would say that's not religious. And then I raise the level of intellectual tension. What about texts? Pilgrim's Progress. What about, can you go, a Sufi text, which some of you who know about that might look at. Can you go on a pilgrimage through texts? Are there such things as literary journeys? Did Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, was it in itself a journey? Was it about a journey? Was it something else? And then slowly, what about computer-mediated things? Is that if not, why not? Are there not enough senses engaged? Is it something else? Then we go to kind of sports sites. These have changed over the years, what I focus on. Then you just go to other sites in popular culture, or athletics, or celebrity figures, or whatever seems to work. And then what you get, I find, to my great delight, is that by the time you get to, say, Elvis, or football, there's some people saying, I had a seminarian in this class, saying that he couldn't find a persuasive reason by the end to exclude Graceland as a religious site and Elvis as in fact a holy person, which of course, these undergraduates went, what? So the point is, you get somebody saying something that some people in the room just will not tolerate. That is, I will not cross that line. You could not possibly say that is religious. And so we have categories of quasi-religious, religious and secular, but then you have to tell me what these things mean. So by the end, if you just watch this, you get these really sophisticated conversations in the end, with people arguing about what constitutes the boundaries between the secular and the religious. Whereas if you just taught a theory class, I've done this, meaning I taught the class for James and Baker. I think the conversations are more sophisticated in this class, taught this way, than they were in that class. They were just parroting, they had learned to think like a couple of people. And they could sort of sound like Freud a little, or some Freuds. Some Freuds are harder to sound like. They could always, undergraduates could sound like the future of illusion Freud. They can't sound like other Freuds. But by the end, there's a kind of real tension. There's always somebody, there's a great deal at stake, because somebody really cares. And then you have this argument at the end, and when we define it at the end, they already know then what the stake is. So they are not letting you say that religion is about ultimate concern. Because they know you're going to sleaze us in and get Elvis back in. But Albert Graceland cannot be in, because this is an offense to, really, people are passionate. So they battle out. So that's the goal, is to enact a kind of high-level theoretical conversation in a way that sounds like it's not that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, exactly. That sort of explained. My question was, so you're using theme kind of as an aperture for the larger discussions about religion.
And I actually have multiple times thought about, I thought I'm going to do gender. Or I pick once in a while, but every time I think about it, it doesn't work as well for what I'm trying to get them to do. The kind of big questions I'm trying to get them to do, to think about like what's religion in a kind of sleazy way. The other ones don't work as well, because here you get celebrity culture, you get popular things, you get war memorials, is the Vietnam War Memorial, and you get multiple things. So you get, this is true, the daughter of Vietnamese immigrants weeping at the end of class because she has, for the first time, encountered this Vietnam War Memorial. And years, uncontrollably, followed me back to the office, an hour and a half of weeping. She never confronted this particular event. Her grandfather goes in Houston to the embassy and protests every single week on a Monday for the last 35 years. And she has all this. But for her, it has a particular kind of thing, and she doesn't know what to say, but it's filled with affect. And I teach this motorcycle pilgrimage to the wall, in which the vets, the sociologists, the anthropologists who write about it, call it a pilgrimage. And some of the vets say it's a sacred place, and you see people weeping, and you see people leaving things, and she's ready to say it's a shrine, and they're ready to say it's a shrine, and then other people are just outraged. So I think sometimes what you need to do in a class is build a kind of intellectual tension and give them the skill to sort of work it all out. And mostly I just sort of sit back. And they sometimes want me to settle things, and I say, I don't know, what do you think? And they all sigh. I don't know, that's a very good question. And they have a sense of urgency about it. So I would pick another opening, another theme, if I thought it would work for that kind of intellectual enterprise as well. Yeah.
Use that idea of building intellectual tension for kind of a model for all of your courses, or do you have different approaches?
I do, in some way. Yeah. Sometimes it's not as acute as that. Sometimes there's less tension. There's always an opening question, and we return to the question. And then along the way, I remind them where we are in our questioning things. Okay, so we've now seen this. It's about to get more complicated, because now we're going to see that. And I just want to warn you, I wave my arms, just want to warn you, things are about to happen here. So, you were warned. And here we go. And then at the end of that, I say, see, there we were. In graduate seminars, I would do it in a slightly different way. And in sort of senior upper level seminars, I would do it in a slightly different way. What I have keep constant is we have a fundamental question or set of questions. Never more than 3, usually 1 or 2. And it has some stakes for them, and it's not easily settled. So I try to give some kind of building tension.
you talked about the way in which the institutional context affects the way you design and put together a syllabus, particularly in terms of just difference in private and public universities. I was curious if you could say a bit more about geography. I mean, you've already mentioned how that obviously affects it, but would that be an instance where it would affect the design of the syllabus, or would you leave that primarily to sort of how discussions emerge in the context of a classroom? I mean, I asked this question with sort of specific experience in mind when I taught at Florida State for 2 years. Each of us in the American Religion History area were required to teach a survey course each year, academic year. And invariably, there were sort of heated discussions about the religion of the founders. So in some instances, Reformed or Calvinist students sort of taking sides in these debates between Jonathan Edwards and Charles Chauncey, or some student feeling, shall we say, a need to kind of rescue their particular tradition, for example, ostracizing or claiming that a particular individual was excluded from their tradition because that person engaged in something that they regard as morally objectionable, such for example, as discussion about slavery and the Bible. And so after teaching a while, I found it necessary to alter the syllabus in the sense of maybe including a greater variety of voices with regard to the American founders, someone like John Leland has a kind of alternate voice, or just devoting more time and different types of questions and so on, because these were always key issues. So it affected the way I designed the syllabus over a period of time, but I was just curious, though, what your experience has been in that regard. I mean, would it be primarily an instance of altering the syllabus, or just sort of waiting for these discussions to emerge in the context of the class when you already have a pretty good idea of what way you want to design the syllabus?
You know, it's a good question and an issue for all of you to think through, I think. I actually do change the syllabus a little bit for the local context. And it's one of two ways. I try to mirror the local context, and I try to present challenges. I try to think about what are the blind spots for people here. And I try to irk them with things that are not here. So I do both things. So when I taught slavery and American Religious History Survey at North Carolina, I did slightly different things than I would do at Texas or at North Carolina. I actually did, it's not that, Frederick Douglass is in every syllabus. But I sometimes complicated the story in different ways and added and subtracted people so that local context was taken seriously. Yeah, I actually did change it. And some of it, of course, emerges, and students teach me. I mean, part of the reason this quirky, bumpy, crazy syllabus, I think it's kind of quirky, it emerged because from listening to students. I mean, everything in this is something that emerged from my experience of what can I do better, and asking what went well and what students did better. And one of the things I found, I sometimes come to a place and then discover, so students at North Carolina know a lot about this but don't know much at all about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that you feel represented on this syllabus in some way. You need to find yourself. Everybody needs to find themselves on the syllabus somewhere. I think, which is why my American Religious History syllabus has a lot of known short readers. Everybody's there. Not everybody's there. Nobody has said to me in the last 10 years, I'm not on your syllabus. Between lectures are there. But I also want to challenge you so that your own kind of, all of our own parochialism is also kind of stretched a little bit. I want to make the familiar strange and the strange familiar. I want you to recognize yourself in the syllabus, but I also want you to think transregionally, imagine yourself in a different place, in a place that, and some of it's just place. Yeah, so I absolutely have changed over the time, and sometimes open with local things. One of the things I did in Texas when I taught this course that I didn't do it here was that I opened with different people. I don't know if you know Selena. Anybody? A Tejana singer. Yeah. So in Texas, we did her gravesite in Corpus Christi, Texas. And I opened with Jay-Z, Thorns, cover of Rolling Stone. An image of Selena done on a magazine cover with like a retablo ex voto, with her like kind of a halo-like thing. The first representation claiming that she, portraying her as a kind of saint-like figure. And with Elvis with the crown, with the Sacred Heart. Everybody always likes Elvis, but what happened in that first day was these Latinas from the borderland, who are freshmen, come to this for their first class, and they see Selena up there, and they think, "You can talk about Selena in college?" In Austin? I'm in. And they all moved to the front of the they moved to the front rows of the class. And then we returned, so you notice Selena's not in this one. Although we have a significant proportion of Latinos at Notre Dame. Maybe I should do it. But I took Selena out and put in football and new hockey. Because I thought, maybe it is. But there was a session about Selena and her gravesite in Corpus Christi, and one of the students took photographs over the fall break for us and came back with that, and we put it on. Is this a shrine? Is she an American saint? So that was a kind of everybody's represented here, and the Alamo, but the Alamo was also in that syllabus as a separate thing. But the people at the Alamo need to know, some people are not so thrilled with Selena, and the white kids from Dallas never heard of Selena. So who here has heard of Selena? And then you see hands go up, and it is a really interesting group of hands. And who visited the Alamo and thinks it's a really great American civic space, and it's the way evangelical she does. And so, as long as they're both a little bit disquieted and a little bit represented, I'm happy. And if they're not, I'm going to put it on the syllabus in some way. So this syllabus looks different than the way I taught it at Texas. But should you do that? I don't know. It's either, is it kind of shameless pandering to the particulars? Is it skillful engaging of, I don't know. Do you miss Selena? How many people don't know who Selena is? Some people? Yeah. So you don't miss her so much. She was tragically killed, and there is a memorial there, and people do bring flowers to her. And she was really important for Latinos in Texas and in the borderland, and in Mexico, too.
And there's a Jennifer Lopez movie. That's just how I
her breakout role.
Right. That's right.
There is right.
Yep.
So that's the local question. So maybe vividly, you put Selena on your syllabus when you're teaching in Texas, and you put Newt Rockne and the alumni magazine from 1932 about all of these things about his death when you're teaching at Notre Dame. I do. You just have to decide that for yourself. That's crazy. There's a canon. There's things you should be teaching. Charles C. and Edwards, it is. More about pilgrimage to Mecca. Less about that crazy stuff. And that's what you have to sort of sort through for yourself. I'm a kind of caricature of a particular way of doing it, maybe. It's useful for you.
I think maybe that's where we should end.
We thank you for listening to or viewing our podcast. For more information and for other podcasts, please see our website, divinity.uchicago.edu/podcasts. Copyright, the University of Chicago Divinity School.